will sign it.
A Michigan woman is preparing to go to Idaho tomorrow to protest the nation's strictest abortion law. Gwen Dempsey of Waterford and other pro-choice activists want Idaho's governor to know his state will suffer tough consequences if he doesn't veto a bill passed there last week. Dempsey will go to that state in the morning to launch a boycott of its #1 product.
I have about a half a bag, a 5-pound bag of Idaho potatoes. Now, these are potatoes that are grown in Idaho and packed in Idaho. So they're purebred potatoes, and I'm returning them to the governor to let him know that this is a preview of what's going to happen all over the country if he does not veto that bill and if he infuriates the women all throughout this country.
Idaho's law bans virtually all abortions except in cases of rape or incest.
It's going to be a hot issue again in Michigan because of the parental consent law that's coming up this year.
It just keeps heating up.
Exactly.
It seems as though
Produce sections could become the newest abortion battlefields. Abortion rights groups are threatening a nationwide boycott of Idaho Potatoes if that state's governor allows the most restrictive abortion bill in the country to become law. Governor Cecil Andrus says he is ignoring the outsiders, some of whom are threatening a broader boycott.
We should boycott Idaho, period, not just potatoes.
We in Idaho are perfectly capable of handling our own decisions.
The bill would ban abortions except in some cases of rape, incest, or threats to the mother's life. Andrus has until at least Monday to act on the bill.
Governor Cecil Andrus says he's still trying to decide this morning whether or not to sign a new abortion bill. Jerry Bowen explains why the decision is no small potatoes.
This may be the new abortion battleground, Idaho's potato fields. Pro-abortion forces are threatening to launch a nationwide boycott of Idaho's #1 cash crop if the state's governor allows this nation's most restrictive abortion bill to become law.
We should boycott Idaho, period, not just potatoes. We shouldn't go there. We shouldn't buy any of its products. It should be a complete boycott.
The issue before us is not potatoes or tourism, it's abortion. And for them to be threatening these kinds of boycotts, we think is just ridiculous.
Idaho Governor Cecil Andrus is getting hundreds of phone calls and letters on the issue, and yesterday, a Michigan potato boycott organizer gave him a bag of potatoes to underscore the potential threat. Governor Andrus said he could do without the outside influence.
There's been a tremendous amount of it from people outside of the state coming in here thinking they know best what Idahoans should do. And we in Idaho are perfectly capable of handling our own decisions.
The governor has at least until Monday to reveal what his decision will be. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
This morning, I'm Harry Smith.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Paula Zahn. What do you have in your hands this morning? That doesn't look like broccoli.
No, these are potatoes. This is a sack of Idaho potatoes, as a matter of fact. And these very potatoes are part of a large and looming controversy that is existing right now in this country's war over abortion. Abortion rights activists are threatening a nationwide boycott of Idaho potatoes if an anti-abortion bill passed by the state legislature becomes law. Coming up, we're going to talk with the leader of the boycott plan and with a sponsor of the abortion bill now on the desk of Idaho Governor Cecil Andrus has triggered another round in the nation's bitter fight over this emotional issue. Yesterday, Gwen Dempsey, a pro-choice candidate for the Michigan State Senate, personally delivered some Idaho potatoes to the governor. She and other abortion rights activists are threatening full-scale boycott of Idaho potatoes if the abortion bill becomes law. Gwen Dempsey joins us this morning from Detroit and from Boise, a sponsor of the bill in question and also a potato farmer. Idaho State Senator Mark Ricks. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Ms. Dempsey, let me start with you. How do you justify making farmers pay for their state's politics?
The farmers and this issue is a problem, and the government's intrusion in abortion is a problem. And we have to nip this at the butt. The farmers in Idaho have called and have said, keep up the good work, you're doing a good job, because most of the people in Idaho are against abortion, but they are pro-choice on the issue, and that's our point. Government should not be involved in this issue. And women across America, the potato of their choice will not be Idaho potatoes if, in fact, the governor does not veto this bill.
Mr. Ricks, Idaho is, of course, famous for potatoes. It is also famous now for attempting to pass a very, very tough anti-abortion law, one that will truly test Roe versus Wade in the Supreme Court. Do you have a sense that this is all starting to backfire a little bit?
No, Harry, I don't hardly feel that way. It is true that there's been a little stir created there, but I'd like to remind Ms. Dempsey that potatoes don't vote, and I think that she is taking a very narrow-minded, kind of a childish approach. And I feel like it's unfair for them to even consider penalizing the industry because of the vote that took place in the chamber.
And I would like to remind Senator Ricks that women's pocketbooks do vote, and that the only people that are interested in playing politics with this issue are the establishment politicians, and the vast majority of people in this country are sick of it.
Mr. Ricks, let me ask you for a second. Assume for a minute that the boycott works. Let's project down the line a year or so, or a year and a half from now. What if this boycott works? In retrospect, do you think the governor should still sign it?
Well, you know, I don't know what the governor is going to do. That, of course, is his decision, his alone, and he's indicated that he's going to make that decision, and I don't know whether any pressures from outside or within is going to change his opinion, and I have no idea how the governor is going to react to this. But I feel like that I have more faith in the people in America, that they're not going to change their eating habits just because of one issue that was passed in a state legislative body.
Ms. Dempsey, is this the right way to go about this? Is making an economic issue out of a moral issue?
The abortion issue is supposed to be the most discussed and debated issue in the 1990s, and we don't want it to be that. We want to work together with these people. We want to work together in our churches and in our community. We don't want government getting involved and we don't want to have a woman's right to choose on this issue under a threat. And we have the right to choose when we go to the grocery store.
There's also now rumblings of some sort of a backlash. If there's a boycott against Idaho Potatoes, some of the potato farmers have said that they're going to stop buying trucks and tractors, for instance, that are manufactured in Michigan. Are you afraid of a backlash, Ms. Dempsey?
That would be absolutely meaningless because the vast majority in this country are pro-choice. And any personal attack on me is a very minor because this issue is a lot bigger than me.
Mr. Ricks, there's also a threat. We heard Molly Yard on the news this morning say that it's not just potatoes that ought to be boycotted, but that the entire state maybe ought to be boycotted, and that the Department of Tourism, we hear, has already received dozens of calls from people saying they're not going to show up in Idaho this year.
You know, Harry, that too, I'd like to just remind the people of America that we have pro-choice potato farmers in this state. We also are not going to retaliate and refuse to buy Dearborn, Michigan product or machinery, because that's a very important item in our farming community. I'd like to just say that the potatoes this year are in very short supply, and there's very few that's available on the open market. And at this particular time, I'd like to thank CBS and Gwen Dempsey for giving us an opportunity to advertise the product. You know, we spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to advertise the Idaho potato product, and now you're giving us an opportunity to do that free gratis here on the station this morning.
Well, I'm not sure it all turns out that way. Go ahead. We just have a couple of seconds.
Yes, I would just like to say hello to the 1,000 women who have held candles around the Capitol buildings. The wax is melted on the Capitol steps. I'd like to say hello to Govenor Andrus is an honorable man. I think he'll make the right decision.
All right.
And I'd like to say hello to all my friends in Idaho.
And he's got about 10 days to do that. Gwen Dempsey, Mark Ricks.
What do potatoes have to do with abortion? They've become a weapon in a bitter struggle over the toughest anti-abortion legislation in the country.
I'm returning to Idaho my unused bag of potatoes, of Idaho potatoes, because I'm not eating any more Idaho potatoes until the governor vetoes this legislation.
As a grower, I feel it's very unfair that we get mixed up in a political issue like this.
Is economic boycott an effective weapon in battles over public policy? And where is the abortion fight headed next? We'll focus on those questions tonight.
This is ABC News Night Live. Reporting from New York, Forrest Sawyer.
State laws come and go, often, even usually unnoticed, but not the one the Idaho State Legislature wants. The lawmakers have sent to the governor's desk a bill that would become the most restrictive abortion law in the nation, forbidding all but a few abortions and calling for tough civil penalties against doctors who perform them. And if enacted, this law would have an even bigger target. It is specifically designed as a challenge to the Supreme Court's landmark Roe v. Wade abortion ruling, all of which leaves Govenor Cecil Andrus in a very hot seat. He will decide by Saturday whether he'll accept the bill. Andrus, as you might imagine, is being pressured from every direction. One lobbyist even buttonholed him while he was doing some yard work. And now, add the biggest pressure tactic of all. Pro-choice activists are threatening to boycott the state's $640 million potato industry if Andrus signs the bill. Is the threat working? And where does the abortion fight turn next? First, the potato wars. Here's Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield.
We will all say no to Idaho's potatoes.
Today, Concerned Women for America is launching a nationwide campaign entitled, "If You Love Life, Eat Idaho Potatoes."
This is not an argument about the merits of starch. This is an argument about abortion. With Idaho Governor Cecil Andrus about to sign or veto the most restrictive anti-abortion law in the land, partisans are threatening or promising to use economic clout to reward or to punish the state of Idaho.
And it would mean a boycott of all their products. Don't go there, don't plan meetings there, don't go skiing in Sun Valley, the whole thing.
For Idaho potato farmers who raise an estimated $640 million worth of potatoes a year, the sudden specter of politics is unsettling.
We're concerned. This is new in a way to us. We didn't expect this out of this issue. I don't think anyone in the state did.
But to Gwen Dempsey, a Michigan office seeker who won network coverage for her trip to Idaho, the link between potatoes and politics is clear.
I'm returning to Idaho my unused bag of potatoes, of Idaho potatoes, because I'm not eating any more Idaho potatoes until the governor vetoes this legislation.
So what does the abortion issue have to do with the price of potatoes? Well, what we're talking about is one of the most common tactics of modern political activists, the boycott, the attempt to change policies or practices by inflicting economic damage on an opponent, and in some cases even a bystander. It's a tactic with a long, controversial history. Captain Charles Boycott was a British landlord driven out of Ireland in 1880 after tenants, led by nationalist Charles Parnell, simply refused to have anything to do with him. The boycott tactic became a favorite of labor unions, whose followers would urge sympathizers to pass them by to help pressure a store into recognizing the union. In the 1940s in New York, civil rights leader and future Congressman Adam Clayton Powell urged blacks not to shop at stores that refused to hire blacks. But it was a young minister, Martin Luther King Jr., in Montgomery, Alabama, who made the boycott famous when he led a months-long movement by blacks to avoid riding segregated buses in 1956.
We, the Negro citizens of Montgomery, Alabama, do now and will continue to carry on our mass protest.
Southern states tried to stop such protests throughout the civil rights era by jailing participants under anti-boycott laws, laws the federal court struck down on First Amendment grounds.
A boycott is the withholding of activity, we're not going to purchase this, we're not going to see that, in an organized way. But certainly a First Amendment activity, no question about it.
The tactic has been used by groups across the political spectrum. Liberals rallied behind California farm workers and Cesar Chavez in the late 60s and early 70s by boycotting table grapes. Conservatives backed efforts to boycott 7-Eleven stores until they pulled racy magazines from their shelves.
We will no longer purchase your products until you respect our families.
And some on the right tried to pressure sponsors to pull out of offensive television shows.
What's offensive to me, I won't spend this for.
After the Exxon oil spill in Alaska, some, including congressmen, urged a boycott of Exxon products, while the company pleaded that retailers were innocent bystanders, the same plea made by Idaho potato farmers today.
And as a matter of fact, there are a lot of pro-choice potato growers out there, so I think that these boycotts, in that respect, I don't know how effective they are when they tar everybody with the same brush.
Every kind of withholding of services hurts somebody besides the target. So that's nothing new.
But while boycotts may be constitutionally protected, are they a good way to decide public policy? Retiring Idaho Senator James McClure, an anti-abortion advocate, doesn't think so.
Special interest groups on both sides of this issue and from all over the country are competing in a mad sprint to out-threaten, out-shout, and out-hype each other. Camera crews and reporters have descended upon Boise to chronicle which group is going to outdo the other.
Another question, are boycotts effective?
I don't think that consumers are as dumb as flaky activists give them credit for being. I think that people today buy for price and convenience and for quality. And I don't know of any corporation that has gone bankrupt because a group of activists went out there and said that they should be boycotted.
Indeed, in Wisconsin and in several other states today, abortion opponents were publicly distributing Idaho potatoes in an effort to counter the boycott threat of abortion rights supporters. Idaho Governor Andrus is expected to sign or to veto the bill within the next couple of days, and ironically, the much-heralded boycott threat could conceivably backfire by making the veto look more like a cave-in to pressure and less like a principled constitutional judgment. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline in New York.
Later, we will talk with a leading political analyst and with a reporter who covers the abortion issue for Newsweek magazine, as we look at how the issue is changing the nation's political and legal landscape. But first, when we come back, the battle in Idaho. We will talk with one of the organizers of the boycott against Idaho potatoes and with a pro-life state senator who is also a potato grower. A Republican who is pro-choice on the abortion issue is a candidate for the Michigan State Legislature who helped organize the boycott against Idaho potatoes. Mark Ricks, a pro-life Republican, is a member of the Idaho State Senate and a co-sponsor of the anti-abortion legislation that sparked the boycott movement. He is also a potato grower. Ms. Dempsey, there are a good number of people, allies of yours, who are sorry to have seen you organize this boycott. They would have preferred some quiet backdoor lobbying with Governor Andrus. They feel that by pressuring him in this public fashion, you might actually have the whole thing backfire in your face. Are you worried about that?
No, I'm not. I just feel like, thank God I'm in America, and I have the right to choose which potato I buy. And the woman's right to choose is under threat in Idaho, and the next state will be Michigan or some other state, and we've got to nip this in the bud today.
Well, I understand that, but there are tactics and there are tactics. The point they are trying to make is that what you have done is put him in the rather difficult position of looking as though, if he were to veto it, as though he had been pressured into it. Did that come into your thinking?
I think that Governor Andrus has the concern of the people in his state, and I think that he'll make the right decision.
Does that mean that you don't think he'll be affected by the boycott?
Absolutely. I think the decision that he will make is that government should not be involved in this issue. The people of Idaho are not for abortion, but they cannot stand government involvement in their life.
Are you prepared, if he does not veto it, that is to say, if he lets it stand without signing it or signs it into law, for the kind of protracted battle that these sorts of boycotts often call for?
If he signs the bill?
If the bill becomes law?
Well, then it's out of my hands. It's out of my control. People are waiting all over America.
You are prepared for a long, long battle.
The pro-choice people in this country will not buy the Idaho potato because that's our choice.
Mr. Ricks, you were a co-sponsor of this bill. Did you anticipate the kind of storm of protest that has come along with it?
You know, Forrest, that concept never even entered my mind. I didn't even dream that people would take exception and want to make an economic issue out of this particular piece of legislation.
If you had known what you were getting into, would you have thought twice?
Well, I feel like, Forrest, that this is a states' rights issue granted to us by the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, and we have those rights reserved to us, and I had anticipated that each state would respect the sovereign rights of one another, and I never dreamed that someone out of state would want to put the pressure on like they've done here. You know, in the legislative process, we go ahead and we legislate by persuasion and not by coercion, and I would think that that ought to be the same principle that we would follow in this particular instance as well.
I believe what he's saying, Ms. Dempsey, is that this is a problem that Idahoans ought to address, and you're a foreigner.
Well, this issue affects all the women across the country, and we had to let the pro-choice advocates in Idaho know that the women in America are behind them 100%. If it were to happen to us, we would expect the same from them, because this is not just an Idaho issue, this is an American issue. This is an issue of freedom.
Mr. Ricks, it might be said that it's a little disingenuous for you to say that this is really a states' rights issue and we are only concerned about that. After all, it is said that the bill was designed specifically to be a challenge to Roe v. Wade, that 1973 landmark ruling that has influenced how abortion is dealt with ever since. Is that true?
Well, Forrest, any piece of legislation that goes through the chambers, whether it's in Idaho, whether it's in Michigan, whether it's in any other state, is certainly challenged for litigation, and it'll all depend upon how far this might go should the governor go ahead and sign it. And at this particular point, I have no idea what the governor is going to do with this particular piece of legislation.
But you see what I mean?
Declared.
The legislation was intended to challenge the very basis of how we have dealt with abortion, and therefore it is really quite a national issue. So when somebody comes in from out of state, they're worried about their concerns, whether they be from Florida or from Texas, and if they're not going to eat potatoes, that's why.
Forrest, I believe that the right to life movement, so to speak, threw this hot potato in Idaho to start the precedence in this country. And they have organized themselves for the past several years, and in five short days, the pro-choice people of America who have not been really heavily involved in this issue organized ourselves, and we have a lot more people involved in this issue today than they have.
Ms. Dempsey, what do you say to those potato farmers? We heard one of them in Jeff's piece just a few minutes ago say, look, thanks a lot, but maybe I'm pro-choice. If I'm not, there are an awful lot of them who are, and I don't appreciate that it's my family that you're hurting. You're hurting innocent people here with this boycott. What do you say to those people?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm not hurting anyone. I love Idaho potatoes. My dad is a farmer, and the last thing that I would do is hurt a farmer. But the situation is that the farmers and the people in Idaho are going to have to convince their legislatures that they do not want government involvement in their life. And on this issue, they are pro-choice. There are 1,000 women that hold candles at the Capitol, and they are thrilled that the women in America are involved in their issue. They've been fighting this for months by themselves.
Ms. Dempsey and Mr. Ricks, thank you very much for telling us about what's going on in Idaho. Let's have a look at the broader political and legal questions. The abortion fight has obviously gone through a dramatic change since the Supreme Court put the issue in the hands of the states to decide. So when we come back, we're going to look at the politics of abortion on the national level, and we'll be joined by political analyst and author Kevin Phillips and by Washington correspondent Ann McDaniel of Newsweek magazine. This is a political analyst and former Republican campaign strategist who is publisher of The American Political Report, a newsletter that monitors political trends. Correspondent Ann McDaniel covers the White House and the Supreme Court for Newsweek magazine and has been Newsweek's principal correspondent on the abortion issue for the past 6 years. And let's do some what-ifs about the legal quarrels that are down the road. Let's assume that the governor signs this bill. I presume that it will then head like a shot to the Supreme Court. What should we look for? What's likely to happen there?
Well, it will go very quickly to the Supreme Court, and the one person to keep your all attention on is Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. 4 justices on the Supreme Court have already indicated a willingness to roll back, if not reverse, Roe versus Wade. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor could cast the swing vote. In previous writings, she's been somewhat ambiguous. She has hinted that she is willing to allow states to restrict abortion rights, but she has not said whether she's willing to allow laws like the Idaho legislature passed. In other words, will she allow states to say that abortion rights can be restricted in all cases except rape, incest, or when the life of the mother is at risk?
Now, this Missouri law that the Supreme Court overturned, Webster versus Reproductive Health Services, that then overturned some of the protections that Roe v. Wade offered, did Justice O'Connor have certain concerns that this law will now address?
Well, she expressed in that opinion her willingness to re-examine Roe versus Wade and possibly reverse it if a case came to the Supreme Court, like the Idaho case, that directly attacked Roe, that said women cannot get abortions, as Roe said, in the first 24 weeks of pregnancy with some limitations, but can only get abortions in very limited circumstances. It would be very hard if the Idaho law is signed and goes to the Supreme Court. It would be very difficult for Justice O'Connor or any other justice to evade the question. They would have to directly attack Roe versus Wade and decide once and for all whether Roe is to be the law of the land.
So finally it confronts them, and when might we see that happen if it does become a law?
Well, it could happen very quickly. It's more likely that it will take months, possibly until next year. My guess is that about this time next year we might hear oral arguments before the Supreme Court, and in July of next year have a decision.
Kevin, we talked about that Missouri law that has really changed things, turned a lot of things back over to the state legislatures to decide, and thus Idaho is embarked upon this. Give me a kind of lay of the land. How has the political world changed since that Supreme Court ruling?
Well, my sense is that what happened is it galvanized the moderate middle to shift from a possibly somewhat anti-Roe v. Wade position into a much more supportive of the pro-choice outlook position. And that operationally that's translated into a politics which has surprised the right to life people with how supportive of pro-choice politicians it's been. And I think the Idaho legislature's action here represents a counterattack, and now we're seeing another stage of the fight.
It is intriguing to me that of all the state legislatures that could have gone in this direction, we're down to Idaho, just one state legislature doing this, and a territory, Guam, which has offered another kind of law. But all the other states seem to have so far stayed away from it. Why is that?
Well, I think a lot of politicians would like to try to avoid the issue, and that goes for people in the legislatures as well as in Washington. But you've got a couple of conservative jurisdictions here that want to tease this out into the open, and we'll have to see what the courts do. Now, the question obviously is what the timing of the courts will be and how that'll interact with the timing of the elections. It looks like this will probably go past 1990, but it's certainly headed for 1992.
Before this ruling by the Supreme Court, and an awful lot of Republicans had made abortion a critical issue when they were out there campaigning. Does this leave them in difficult straits for the now aroused pro-choice movement?
It leaves them in extremely difficult straits. Lee Atwater, the chairman of the GOP, is spending a good part of his time trying to figure out how the Republican Party can both support the pro-life platform it passed in 1988 and also allow many of its candidates to take pro-choice positions in order to attract primarily young and moderate voters to the GOP. If they can't attract those voters, they probably can't win in 1990 or in 1992.
Well, we've got a fall campaign that's just around the corner here, and I presume that this Idaho discussion is, in a sense, framing the debate that we will see in the fall. How important do you think an abortion is going to be?
Well, it's already proved to be quite important in primaries. We've seen two things. One is if a candidate changes his or her position, the voters are likely to punish them, even when the candidates are going to the pro-choice side. Jim Courter of New Jersey recently had to drop out after changing his position to the pro-choice side. He got so much flack he had to leave. I think this will be a major issue in a number of states, in a number of races. It may only make 1 or 2 points difference in the polls, but of course 1 or 2 points can win or lose a close race.
Kevin, I was talking to one analyst today who said, look, you know, the people who were involved in demonstrations, who were involved in organizing boycotts are really about 2 years behind the curve. What counts now is electoral politics, pure and simple. It's going to be who beats who, and in the end, that's going to help shape the way the abortion issue is finally framed in the next years ahead. How do you see it?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the electoral side is extremely important. We've got a lot of gubernatorial races this year in which the abortion issue is going to be front and center and extremely significant. And depending on the outcomes there, you can shape the politics and shape the attitudes of the legislatures, and even the courts will pay some attention. But I think enough is going to remain in the hands of the courts. That the elections in 1990 won't tell us everything.
Advocates say they've been stabbed in the back. And this Idaho Governor Cecil Andrus has betrayed the pro-life movement. Andrus has vetoed what would have been the most restrictive anti-abortion law in the country. Andrus, who's a longtime foe of abortion, vetoed the measure late last night, saying its exceptions were far too narrow, especially for victims of rape and incest. But pro-choice groups are claiming victory, including a Waterford Township woman who promised to start a boycott of Idaho potatoes if Cecil Andrus allowed the measure to become law.
This is not an Idaho issue. This is an American issue. If it can happen in Idaho, it can happen in Michigan or anywhere else. And we've made our point. And I think the legislators in the country can go back to what they should be doing and staying out of the lives of American families and American women.
Dempsey says now that the measure has been vetoed, she wants her potatoes back, saying she doesn't like to waste money.
Boycott of Idaho Potatoes is praising the governor of that state tonight for his veto of what would have been the nation's most restrictive abortion law. Governor Cecil Andrus last night vetoing a proposal that could have stopped up to 95% of all abortions in Idaho. Andrus claims the boycott of his state's #1 cash crop did not play a role in his decision. Tonight, though, Gwen Dempsey of Waterford Township is claiming victory for pro-choice activists.
This is a victory of sense, judgment, and the right to choose. And the right to choose is what makes America great. And I think that we should all honor the women in Idaho for their strength in fighting this attempt to take away this important right.
Right to Life groups say Governor Andrus has set himself up for a big fall from political power because of that controversial veto. Catherine? Women and other pro-choice activists are celebrating the veto of what would have been this country's most restrictive abortion law. Gwen Dempsey organized a boycott of Idaho potatoes if the bill had become law. But last night, Governor Cecil Andrus vetoed the legislation. Dempsey is claiming victory.
This is not an Idaho issue. This is an American issue. If it can happen in Idaho, it can happen in Michigan or anywhere else. And we've made our point. And I think the legislators in the country can go back to what they should be doing and staying out of the lives of American families and American women.
Right to Lifers are blasting those groups. Governor Andrus tonight said...
1973 Roe versus Wade ruling. Andrus's veto infuriated many of them, but some other pro-life advocates were having second thoughts. Richard Wilkins of Brigham Young University says the Idaho law might have been declared unconstitutional, thus solidifying the Roe versus Wade decision. But he says a clear state law permitting abortion only in the case of rape, incest, or fetal deformity would pass the High Court's review.
I think a carefully drafted statute along those lines can be upheld as constitutional.
Still, the Idaho veto gave pro-choice advocates a considerable morale boost.
I think it's a lesson and a message to all anti-choice politicians everywhere.
Legislators are backing away from new abortion laws in a lot of states. They don't know how far the Supreme Court will allow states to go. They do know tough anti-abortion legislation is sure to result in controversy and confrontation, the way it did in Idaho. And what politician needs that with an election coming up? Gary?
Doug Kiker in Washington, thank you.
Larry and Michael Tucker, stars of TV's L.A. Law, have been active in the pro-choice movement. Both feel celebrities can play a role in politics.
Can you imagine what effect you and the others, Sybil Shepherd and the rest of you, had as you marched forward with that phalanx? Can you fathom what that meant to the American people when they saw it?
I think when you look at a crowd of people and you see faces that you know, it changes the nature of looking at a crowd of people. And also, each one of those faces is somebody that you have a history with as an audience. You know, you've seen them go through whatever, bad stuff, good stuff, funny stuff. You have a sense of who they are. And you see them out there as part of that huge crowd of people. It turns it into a very personal experience for the people that are watching.
I think it also does the audience, it does something for them to see Jill Eikenberry stand up and say, I'm not playing a part here. This is what I think. As a person, I believe this, and I believe it very strongly. I think that has a pretty strong effect on people.
We dissent!
The Hollywood Women's Political Committee, by helping to sponsor and organize things like the March in Washington, the difference that you see is that a choice candidate won in Virginia, a choice candidate won in New Jersey,
the governor's special session in Florida was defeated on choice. We had a Republican choice candidate win in San Diego. That you're seeing choice candidates win because politicians have started to see that this is an issue people cared about and they would vote on.
It's hard to see any rational political movement in this country without a Hollywood component, whether it's people from Hollywood or techniques that have been developed in Hollywood.
But do you think that Hollywood will ever really have an influence on politics in Washington? Because it really still doesn't now.
Connie, an actor, was president of the United States for 8 years. That was the epitome of Hollywood's influence. An actor, a guy who hosted GE Theater and who was in Bedtime for Bonzo, was the president of the United States, meeting with other presidents, governing the agenda of this country. I don't want another actor to be president, quite honestly. What I do want is liberal and progressive ideas to have the same communications tools available to them that right-wing ideas have had for the last 10 years. If you can't communicate, it doesn't matter how smart you are.
The center of a proposed boycott of Idaho Potatoes says Idaho Governor Cecil Andrus made the right choice about abortion. Andrus yesterday refused to sign into law a bill which would have given Idaho the most restrictive abortion legislation in the country. Pro-choice advocate Gwen Dempsey of Waterford Township visited Andrus in Boise earlier this week. Dempsey told Andrus women nationwide would boycott Idaho's #1 cash crop if he signed that bill into law. She says the governor's decision is a victory for women nationwide.
The people in Idaho were happy that the people in America were behind them, because this is not an Idaho issue, this is an American issue. If it can happen in Idaho, it can happen in Michigan or anywhere else.
Right to Life advocates say they're disappointed by Andrus's refusal to back the bill. They say, however, his decision will ultimately serve as a rallying point for them and could actually help their cause. Still ahead on Eyewitness.
This is it, your ultimate bargain opportunity. Lower prices on absolutely everything, including every carpet pad and even installation. It's the biggest, the best, the ultimate. Everything's on sale till Saturday at New York Carpet World.
Get personal with Jermaine Jackson on the next ET.
I'm pregnant. Can you pass the turnips?
Hey, you can just forget about abortion because this kid's going up for adoption, and that's that.
That's how Hollywood sees it. Real life is not much different. And it's not surprising that pregnant teenagers rarely want to play this drama out.
It would have killed my parents worse than not telling him.